She braced for torture when he bought her, but this middle-aged human gave her freedom and love. Her name had been taken long before her voice. For 6 years, silence had been her only defense. Not the calm, dignified silence of a priestess, but the hollow quiet of someone who had screamed until her throat burned raw and then learned that even pain had limits. Her body remembered what her voice forgot. Every step was measured, every breath shallow. Her skin, once luminous, had dulled to the color of early frost, icy blue, with the faintest hint of violet beneath. Her long black hair hung in jagged, uneven strands, the product of rough blades and careless hands. She stood barefoot on the slaver's dais, a leash looped around her throat, trailing like a forgotten cable. Her frame was slight, malnourished, sunken, and yet there was no slump in her spine. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She had become very skilled at seeming like nothing at all. "Docile," the auctioneer called out, flicking his data sheet to highlight the listing. "Blue-skinned variant, linguistic strain, no known species match, silent for years. Still fertile, probably," he laughed, and the crowd laughed with him. She felt none of it. Not rage, not shame, just the cold, anchoring weight of a moment too familiar. The weight of being watched and not seen, but one part of her still remembered how to listen. "Cognitive decay possible," the auctioneer continued, tapping her collar. It chimed once. Her neural band's been scrambled. Probably useless to anyone looking for an interface. But she doesn't bite, doesn't talk back. Dirt cheap. Someone near the front spat. "You could get better response from a biocleaner." Another voice amused. "Cut her open. Bet the bones are still fresh." The auctioneer lifted his shock baton and gave her a gentle prod at the side of her ribs. No response, not even a twitch. He tried again, a little harder, still nothing. Inside, her body was screaming, "Don't react, don't react, don't react." Every system she'd learned to suppress, fear, flinch, reflex, stayed coiled under the surface like sleeping wires. Her collar tingled faintly, but it didn't surge. Yet. Then the auctioneer sighed. "Starting bid, 10 credits. Any takers?" The crowd shifted. Interest waned. This wasn't a gladiator, not even a good specimen for breeding houses. Just another broken, silent relic from a dead culture. Silence. "8, someone muttered. "6 to put her down clean," another barked. And then, 10. The voice was rough, low, and unexpected. It came from the back of the pit. Heads turned. Edgar Wren stepped forward from the shadows, coat dust-streaked and hood drawn low. His gait was slow but deliberate, like someone who'd spent a lifetime walking through forgotten places. He didn't meet the crowd's eyes. He only looked at her. At the still, silent figure on the dais. The auctioneer blinked. "You serious?" Edgar didn't repeat himself. He pulled out a thin, worn data chit, one of the old analog encoded kinds that couldn't be spoofed, and slotted it into the register. The collar chirped once, then turned green. "Transfer complete." "Sold," the auctioneer said, half laughing. "To the museum fossil." A wave of jeers followed him as he stepped forward. Edgar ignored it. He was already focused on her, reading her like he would an artifact, a fragment of language not yet translated. As he approached, she tensed, not visibly, not to the untrained eye. But he noticed. He always noticed. Her breath hitched just once. The pulse at her throat jumped. He reached out, not for her, but for the collar's clasp. Slow, deliberate, no sudden moves. And that was when she flinched, not just flinched, recoiled. Her shoulders locked, spine bowed, knees bent like something bracing for a lash. Her fingers curled so tightly into her palms, they left crescent moons in her skin. He didn't touch her. He let his hand fall. "Come," he said, voice like gravel soaked in memory. And then he turned without waiting to see if she'd obey. She stood frozen, but her hunger, for life, for motion, for a way, was older than fear. She followed. The shuttle was old, retrofitted from an agricultural hull. Its bulkhead panels still bore faded stencils from a grain fleet long dissolved. The interior was cramped, warm from residual solar bleed, and smelled faintly of ozone and dust. She curled in the far corner, spine against the wall, arms around her knees. Edgar didn't speak to her, not directly, but his voice murmured now and then, quiet and constant. "In Driellen, the word for freedom and forgetting share a root. I never liked that." He adjusted a navigation dial, blinking at the interface. "Funny how language tells you who they used to be." She didn't understand all of it, but she understood the tone. He wasn't talking to Commander. He was talking to remember something. Kirith 9 drifted on the edge of forgotten space. A fringe moon orbiting a dead gas giant, its surface was too cold for comfort, too warm to kill. The air was breathable with minor filtration. The mining corps had abandoned it after strip harvesting the crust for volatile ores. Now, only salvagers, runaways, and ghosts remained. Edgar's home was built into the remnants of a crashed orbital observatory. Old alloy hulls had been patched with insulation mesh and solar skins. The inside was dry and dim, warmed by converted geothermal vents. A low hum filled the space, salvaged power cells cycling through their charge. Books, actual books, datapads, artifacts, dust, rows of carefully labeled shelves, fragile relics placed like offerings on altars of memory. Her gaze swept the interior as they entered. No restraints, no cages. But what caught her eye, what made her hesitate, was the object resting on a steel slab near the far wall. A broken visor. Its inner lens was lined with photonic threads, and etched across them faintly were symbols from her own language. She had never seen that dialect outside the temples. Edgar followed her gaze. That one came from Alaris B, bombed out before the registry ever cataloged it. Took me 3 months to piece those glyphs together. You recognize them? She said nothing, but something shifted in her eyes, something close to shock, and he saw it. He didn't press her. Instead, he gestured toward a door. That room's yours. Water recyclers past the curtain. No locks. She stepped cautiously inside. A cot, a folded blanket, a datapad already lit with pictographic lessons. Her language, interactive. The interface had been modified to account for memory loss. He had prepared this before today, not for a slave, for someone like her. Before she could make sense of the implications, he turned and left. She didn't sleep. She crouched on the cot, blanket untouched, eyes tracking the doorway. Her stomach cramped from emptiness, but she didn't touch the food pack he had left. Hunger was easier than betrayal. Still, she listened. Beyond the curtain, Edgar spoke to himself, or to no one. The word for truth in Lirani syntax only exists in plural form, as if a single truth is never enough. She didn't know the language, but she understood the sadness. Eventually, the silence returned, and then music. Not a song, just 4 cracked notes from an alien stringed instrument. Out of tune, hesitant, but played like it mattered. When she finally reached for the food, her fingers shook. She tried to open the packet quietly, failed. Her breath caught, panic blooming, but no one came. She ate, slowly, tasted salt, heat, her eyes burned. Not from spice, from memory. As the lights dimmed toward the simulated night cycle, Edgar passed by her door. He didn't stop, didn't look in, but he hesitated. And in that moment, just a second, he looked directly at her. Not her body, her. Then he nodded, slow and small, and kept walking. She sat frozen for a long time after he left, not because she feared he'd return, but because for the first time in years she didn't want him to. She'd learned to wake without moving. That habit had kept her alive in the pens, where the softest sound could bring punishment, and the act of rising might earn you a lash. So now, as warm air filtered gently through the room, she let her eyes open in stillness. No motion. Just breathe. The cot beneath her was alien in its softness. The blanket, unfolded, unused, rested at the corner, untouched. Her shawl had slipped in the night, and the artificial light above cast a pale amber glow across the floor. For a long while she didn't shift. The silence wasn't a trap yet, but it could become one. It always had. She hadn't meant to sleep. Sleep was trust, and trust had always bled. But her body had surrendered before her fear could resist. Her last memory before darkness had been the man's eyes, Edgar, and the way he hadn't looked at her like a thing. That memory had lingered as sleep took her. Not pain, not force, just a nod and quiet. She drew in a breath now, slow. The air tasted clean, filtered, dry, faintly metallic. She could smell heat, steam, something cooking. A trick? Her stomach clenched. Hunger stirred like a whisper from inside a locked room. She rose quietly, tucking the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her feet touched the floor with the care of someone who'd been punished for walking too loud. And when she pulled the curtain back, she did it with the tension of prey stepping into open ground. The man was already up. He sat at a narrow table, sleeves rolled, head bent over something she didn't recognize. A relic? A puzzle of broken stone and flickering lines. Around him, the room hummed with the soft life of power cells and filtered air. He didn't look up, but he knew she was there. "There's tea," he said, voice low and even. "And food. It's safe." No command, no expectation, just a statement. The way someone might comment on the weather. She hesitated in the doorway, every nerve listening for deception. If she moved toward him, would he change? If she reached for the food, would it be poison? Or would her hunger be used as a leash the way it always had? He didn't rise, didn't watch her, just kept working. Her eyes scanned the table, 2 bowls, one untouched. She waited. Still, he didn't speak. Her hunger won. She took 3 steps forward, then froze when the floor creaked beneath her foot. A sharp breath caught in her throat. Habitual, instant. She waited for pain. None came. She reached the food station, lifted the lid. Warm, not heavily spiced. Some humans like to taunt with flavors she couldn't stomach. But hearty. A broth, mushrooms, grains. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the bowl. She hadn't eaten warm food, and she didn't know how long. The first sip hit like a blade to the chest. Her breath faltered. Her eyes burned. She blinked hard, swallowing more than food. She tried not to look at him, but she noticed he still hadn't moved. This was a trick. It had to be. A test. Warmth always meant punishment later. But nothing happened. She sat, cautiously, bowl cradled in both hands. Only then did he speak again. "Those glyphs on the data pad in your room, did you recognize them?" She didn't answer. He glanced over, not pressing, just watching. "I spent years trying to reconstruct them. Most records were erased, classified. The registry called your language a non-functional cultural remnant. I don't believe that." She stared into her bowl. He let the silence linger. Then, "You don't have to talk. But if you do, I'll listen. I know what it's like to be cataloged and discarded." That last part hit differently. She looked up. His eyes weren't soft, but they weren't cold either. They were tired, like something had been worn down in him a long time ago and never rebuilt. "You," her voice cracked. She flinched at the sound. The word had escaped before she meant it to. He blinked. She tried again. "You read them?" He nodded. "Tried. Didn't always get it right. Your language has multiplicity, layers of meaning stacked like mirrors. One symbol could mean hope, hunger, or home, depending on where you stand when you read it." A breath caught in her chest. He had read them. Her voice faltered again. "My mother called them truth knots." He didn't react with surprise, only nodded. "That fits." Silence stretched. Then she said it. The word had lived behind her teeth for years, hidden, dangerous. But it came now, hoarse and small. "Taralan." Edgar's eyes darkened. "I've heard that before," he murmured. "In a collapsed archive on the 4th moon of Veltus. It was etched into a ceiling beam, surrounded by burnt walls. I thought it meant origin." She shook her head. "Number not, origin." Her words were shaky, lips unused to forming them. "It means where your soul returns when you are forgotten." A long pause followed, and then he said it back, not perfectly, but with care. "Taralan." Her throat ached. He hadn't misused it. He hadn't claimed it. He'd heard it. And somehow that hurt more than cruelty. Because she'd prepared for cruelty. She knew what to do with pain. But recognition? She didn't know what to do with that. She lowered her head, bowl trembling in her grip. He rose slowly and walked to the relic on the table. He lifted it, a shard of obsidian, etched with old lines she knew weren't human, and placed it in front of her. "I don't know what this means," he said. "But I think you do." Her fingers hovered over it. The lines were familiar, not just in form, but in memory. One had been carved into the wall of her temple. Another had been drawn into her sister's palm before the soldiers came. She touched it, and her body remembered. A ripple ran through her fingers. Not electricity, not energy, but the thrum of memory encoded in shape. A language made not of sounds, but sensations. "It's not a word," she whispered. "It's a blessing." He didn't ask for its meaning. He only watched her. And for once, she didn't feel like a specimen. She felt remembered. Later, as the light outside dimmed to the amber gray of dusk, he stepped to the sealed hatch at the edge of the dome and pulled on a weathered coat. "I'm checking the west antenna array. Storm's scarring the horizon. Want to come?" She didn't answer, just stood, walked beside him. Outside, the wind wasn't violent, but sharp. Kirith Nine's atmosphere carried chill with quiet insistence, whispering against the rocky plain. They walked, not far, just beyond the dome, where the antenna shimmered with faint light. He adjusted the array, muttering about feedback distortion. She wandered a few paces, boots crunching over the thin frost. Her eyes caught something half buried in the ground. Metal. She crouched, brushed the dust away. It was a fragment, maybe from a satellite wing or drop beacon. But on it, faint and unmistakable, was a glyph. One of hers, etched, not burned. This place had seen her people before. She turned to Edgar. He raised a brow. "You found something." She held it up. He stared, and then for the first time, she saw it. In his eyes. Not just recognition, guilt. "I thought this moon was uninhabited," he said quietly. "But I found artifacts buried deep. The registry didn't listen." Her voice came, stronger now. "They never do." He took the piece gently from her hands, and in the dim, silent twilight of a forgotten world, something shifted between them. Not ownership, not obligation, but understanding. And she realized something terrifying. She didn't expect torture anymore. She expected to be seen. And that was even harder to survive. The wind had calmed by morning, but the stillness that replaced it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that settles after a story's first truth has been spoken. The kind that waits. Inside the dome, the scent of sterilized clay and rehydrated root broth still lingered from the night before. The dishes remained untouched on the edge of the sink. Edgar had left them where they were, as if cleaning up too quickly might erase something fragile. She hadn't gone back to her room. Instead, she'd stayed near the artifact table, beside the shard she'd found, the one etched with the glyph that had once been carved above her family's shrine. She sat with her legs folded beneath her, and the shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, not for warmth, but for grounding. Her long black hair hung loose now, no longer matted or tied. She hadn't even noticed when she'd stopped hiding behind it. Across the dome, Edgar moved with quiet purpose, not hurried, not watching her. He pulled open storage crates, shifting through salvaged parts, worn circuitry, fractured polyglass, broken sensor nodes. With every motion, he gave her space while quietly allowing her to belong in it. She watched his hands. There was something precise in the way he worked, not just methodical, but respectful. He never forced a fit. He never pried too hard. Even metal deserved to be handled with care. She spoke without warning. "Do you have names?" Edgar looked up. His face didn't show surprise, but the pause before his answer told her he hadn't expected her to initiate conversation. "Not yet." "We do," he said. "Some given, some earned." She nodded slowly, then looked down at the shard in her lap. "My name was taken," she said. "They burned it from the records." She ran her fingers along the etched glyph again. The grooves were shallow now, weather-worn, but they still held memory, still held meaning. "I had another name," she said quietly. "The one they used in the pens, it wasn't mine. Just a number, a mockery." Edgar didn't interrupt. She glanced at him. Her eyes, pale and reflective, shimmered in the low light like pools of starlight. "I don't want it back," she said. "Not the first name. It was a child's name. It belonged to someone who didn't know how the world really was." A long silence passed between them. Then she asked without looking at him, "Can I choose a new one?" Edgar set down the tool he was holding. His hands rested flat on the table, palms open. "Yes, you can." She closed her eyes. There were names in her language that meant strength, names that meant rebirth, survival, vengeance. But none of them felt right. She didn't want to be remembered as something that endured because it had no choice. She wanted to mean something again. When she opened her eyes, she looked at the glyph, and then back at Edgar. "Salary," she said. It was soft, spoken with intention. He repeated it back carefully. "Salary." She breathed out. It wasn't quite a smile, but the tension in her shoulders released, just a little. Her new name had weight, and it settled into her chest like something that belonged. "What does it mean?" Edgar asked gently. Salary tilted her head. "It's difficult. Closest in your words would be echo in still water. Something lost returned, not always the same." He nodded. He understood. Later that day, Edgar invited her outside again. The light was sharp and silver this time, cutting across the rocky plains like broken glass. The storm had scrubbed the sky clear. For the first time, she saw the ridge beyond the crash scar, the jagged remains of some forgotten orbital debris. its hull half consumed by frost and time. Edgar handed her a set of gloves. We'll need to reinforce the solar panels before next freeze. They don't like the high saturation winds. She took them, pulled them on slowly. The fabric was rough, but it fit. No chains, no commands, just a task, shared. They worked in silence, side by side. Not because there was nothing to say, but because silence now carried different meanings. It wasn't fear, it was concentration, presence. When she scraped frost from one of the solar struts and found a symbol carved beneath, a stylized loop resembling one from her sacred tongue, she touched it without thinking. Edgar saw. Yours? Number older, she said, but familiar. He didn't ask more. But when they finished the repair and the dome lights surged back to full brightness, she didn't return to her cot. She followed him into the relic chamber. You knew, she said. Back at the auction, you knew I was more than what they said. I suspected, he replied. Why risk it? He looked at her then. Not like she was a mystery to solve, but like she was a question he'd been asking himself for a long time. Because I've seen what happens when silence is mistaken for consent, when people stop looking. Her voice was quiet. You stopped looking too once. He didn't deny it. I did. Then why now? Because I couldn't live with not trying again. The honesty in that shook her more than kindness ever had. She didn't reach for him. But she stepped closer, close enough that when her hand brushed the edge of the relic table, his knuckles touched hers for the briefest moment, not flinching, not bracing, just contact. And though she didn't say it aloud, the word echoed in her chest again. Sailry, not lost, not owned, chosen. And for the first time, the name felt like armor she'd made herself. The relic chamber was quieter than usual, not the silence of avoidance, but of something being carefully uncovered, something not yet ready to be spoken aloud. Sailry sat on the floor beside the low sorting table, the threads of her long black hair pooling over her shoulder like ink in slow water. She wore Edgar's utility vest, cinched with cord, sleeves rolled to her elbows as she catalogued a fragmented ceremonial disc. The ancient carvings, etched in a spiral pattern, looked almost like language but said something older than speech, a memory, a ritual, a scar. Edgar sat across from her, polishing a ceramic shard with the edge of his sleeve. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes tracked every movement she made. She didn't flinch from being watched anymore. Not by him. The quiet between them had changed. It no longer pressed. It held. Some of these markings, Sailry said softly, tracing one with her stylus. They aren't just aesthetic. They were designed to resonate with sound. When the right tone is sung, the pattern responds, vibrates. A harmonic script? Edgar asked. She nodded. My people use them in healing. It's how the elders passed memory into the body. Through sound, vibration, and breath. The knowledge wasn't just spoken. It was embedded. She fell quiet for a moment, eyes on the fractured edge of the relic. This one belonged to my mother's line. Edgar's voice was quiet. You're sure? Sailry didn't hesitate. The color, the way the spiral leans inward, not outward. And this symbol here, see it? She pointed. That was her branch's marker, worn only by those trained to recite ancestral law. He leaned closer, respectfully. Did you learn that law? Some, she said, before they took the temple, before they decided knowledge was more dangerous than resistance. Her voice didn't shake, but something behind her eyes did. I tried not to remember her face, she added. It hurt too much, but now it's coming back. The way she held the relics, the way her voice sounded when she hummed during the night watch. Edgar didn't interrupt. He listened like someone reading scripture aloud in a ruined church. She used to say names were only powerful if you chose them. That's why she never gave me a temple name. She said I'd earn one of my own when I knew who I was. You have, Edgar said. Sailry looked at him. Have I? He nodded. Sailry wasn't the name they gave you. It's the one you gave yourself. That's the one that survives. Something tightened in her chest. She looked away, swallowing a sudden weight in her throat. I never told you, she said. What happened to my sister? Edgar's hands stilled. She was older, sharper than me. She used to braid my hair and mark my arms with chalk glyphs to protect me from forgetting, she said. She refused to kneel when the hunters came. They took her first. I heard her scream. I never saw her again. Edgar inhaled slowly. I recited the loyalty script, Salary said. I said the words they demanded. I didn't believe them, but I said them. She exhaled, long and slow. I used to hate myself for surviving. Thought it made me weak, a traitor. He met her eyes. You're not weak. You're here. And she's not. Which means her story lives in you, Edgar said, and your survival is the vessel that carried it forward. Sayelri turned that thought over like a stone in her hand. Then she stood. Come with me. There's something I need to show you. He followed without question. She led him into the far wing of the dome, where the older, unfiltered light cast a warmer hue across the relic cases. There, she stopped in front of a locked cabinet Edgar hadn't touched in months. I found this the first week, she said. Didn't open it, didn't want to take anything, but I recognized what was inside. She keyed in a sequence on the panel. The lock released with a hiss. Inside was a heartweave, threadbare but intact, its sea-green strands gently coiled into the traditional dual-loop pattern. Edgar stared. I thought it was ceremonial, he said. Didn't know what it meant. It means everything, Salary replied. It's not jewelry, it's part of a bonding ritual. Two people place one loop around each other's wrists. They speak the blessing. It stays until the vow is done. Edgar looked at her. She was watching the weave, not him. I repaired it, she said. The threads were damaged, but still remembered the pattern. She ran her fingers along its edge. I don't know what we are yet, she said, but I know what we're not. And what's that? She turned to him. We're not lost. Edgar nodded slowly, then stepped forward. He reached out, not for her, but for the weave. When he took it into his hands, she didn't stop him. I won't ask for anything from you, he said, but I'll carry what you give. She hesitated, then stepped closer, and gently took one loop and placed it around his wrist, then the other around hers. The weave settled between them. I don't know the whole blessing, she said, but I remember the beginning. She looked into his eyes and spoke the ancient words in her own tongue, low and deliberate. We do not bind. We carry. Edgar said the response, slowly, letting the rhythm find him. And we do not forget. The silence after wasn't hollow. It was whole. Later they sat together near the heater while wind stirred softly beyond the dome. Salary sipped from a shared mug, her legs tucked beneath her. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. Edgar turned his head. Of them? No, she said. Of myself, of what I remember. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Instead, he lifted his own datapad and slid it across the table toward her. It was open to a document. Proposed Restoration Codex, Pre-Registry Cultural Languages. She blinked. You want to write this? With you, he said. You correct me. I learn from you. Salary smiled. Not politely. Not faintly. Genuinely. I accept. And when she reached for the pad, their fingers touched again. Not accident. Not chance. This time, it was choice. It started with a low, distant tremor. A soft shudder rippled through the floor of the dome just after midday, rattling the base of the relic shelves. Salary's fingers paused mid-symbol, her stylus hovering above the datapad's surface. Edgar looked up from across the chamber, brows drawn tight. They both waited, then the vibration faded. Silence reclaimed the air. Edgar set his tools down. That wasn't atmospheric. Salary nodded once, the muscle in her jaw twitching. Seismic? She asked. He stood. No tectonic lines this close to the dome. I would have felt the buildup. He moved to the monitor by the entry hatch, fingers flying across the console. A moment later, the exterior sensors lit up. Something just broke through the lower perimeter, he said. She rose without a word. The wind had shifted again, thinner now, tinged with static. Dust from the ridge curled in spirals, twisting through the dry light. Kirith Nine's sky turned a dull silver gray like bruised glass. Sayelri followed Edgar down the rocky slope toward the base of the western antenna array, where the soil had cracked around an embedded power node, and next to it, something out of place, a dented, sand-scoured beacon, standard slave registry model, active. Edgar crouched beside it, his breath tightening. This shouldn't be here. Sayelri stood still, eyes locked on the faint red pulse at the device's core. It pulsed like a heartbeat. They're tracking escapees, she said. Her voice was flat, but her shoulders had gone rigid. Edgar didn't look up. There's no official route through this system, no patrols. They must have had a report. Sayelri was already scanning the horizon, her hands flexed at her sides, alert, ready. It was me, she said. I spoke my name. activated the glyphs. Someone heard it. Edgar turned to her, surprised. No one's listening to the old language anymore. Machines are. He didn't argue. Instead, he lifted the beacon gently from the ground and crushed its signal plate underfoot. The device sparked once, then died. That won't stop them from coming, she said quietly. I know. They didn't speak again until they were halfway back to the dome, and even then, only when the wind picked up hard enough to drown their footsteps. That night, she sat by the solar kettle, knees pulled to her chest. Edgar moved around the dome with a kind of focused restlessness. He was scanning system logs, adjusting power lines, checking weapon locks on the outer hatch. They both knew what was happening, but neither said the word. Raiders, or worse, contract bounty teams who dealt in flesh and memory. Sayori's thoughts spun. Her instinct screamed at her to run, not because she believed she could escape. She'd seen what happened to those who tried, but because some habits never left you. She could still feel the pulse of collar shocks in her bones, could still hear the screams in holding tanks, still taste metal and dirt. But she didn't run. She stayed, because this time, she wasn't alone, and that terrified her even more. Edgar finally stopped moving and sat near her, not too close. His face was quiet, unreadable in the low amber light. The lines at the edges of his eyes looked deeper now, etched by worry, not age. You should sleep, he said. She didn't look at him. I won't. I can keep watch. She shook her head. I need to be awake if they come. His voice softened. We don't know that anyone's coming. You're wrong, she said. Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and clear. You think because you bought me, I stopped being hunted? I never thought that, he replied. A beat passed. She let out a shaky breath. Then why did you bring me here? She asked. This wasn't curiosity. This was need, a desperate pull at the knot between them. Edgar didn't answer immediately. He stared at the stone floor for a long time, like the words were buried in it. Then finally, because I couldn't forget what I saw when I looked at you. She waited. I saw someone who had been made to disappear, but hadn't. And I realized I'd spent years pretending that just witnessing something was enough, that noticing it made it better. His voice lowered. It doesn't. Witnessing isn't saving. She turned her head slowly toward him. And now? She asked. I don't want to be a witness anymore. Her breath caught. That answer cracked something open, not in anger, not in fear, but in sorrow. Because for years she had hoped, secretly, impossibly, that someone would say those words, not with pity, not with rescue, but with choice. And here he was. She reached out then, not boldly, not confidently, just enough for her hand to graze his. His hand didn't pull away. She closed her eyes and let herself feel it, the warmth, the realness, the terrible beauty of being touched and not owned. After a long silence, he whispered, Do you remember what it felt like before they took everything? She didn't answer at first. Then, yes, but only in pieces. Which piece do you hold on to? My sister's voice. She called me Sharan. Edgar furrowed his brow. What does that mean? Sayori smiled. It was faint, but it was real. It means the part of the flame that doesn't burn you. He said nothing, but his eyes glinted in the dim light like something unspoken had settled in him too. That night she didn't sleep in her cot. She curled up near the heater, blanket tucked under her chin, breath steady. Edgar stayed near the hatch, rifle in his lap, shoulders tense, but calm. Outside, the desert wind howled through the ravine. Metal sang against rock. The cold scratched at the dome's outer hull. But inside, for the first time in years, she dreamed of voices without screams. And when her hand drifted toward his in her sleep, he didn't flinch. The storm arrived at dawn, not with thunder, but with silence so dense it felt like pressure on the skin. Kirith Nine's upper stratosphere rippled in shifting tones of gray, silver, and dust-swept bronze. Sayori stood by the dome's viewport, one hand braced against the frame, her eyes locked on the haze beyond. The desert had disappeared. Inside, the hum of containment shields pulsed steadily, low, warm, protective. But her thoughts pressed louder. Behind her, Edgar was assembling backup power cores on the floor, surrounded by cables and repurposed microcells. His sleeves were rolled up. Dust streaked his arms. He moved with practiced calm, but she could tell his mind wasn't on the wires. She hadn't spoken since the previous night, not because there was nothing to say, but because something inside her was unraveling in ways she didn't yet know how to name. Are you cold? He asked without looking up. No, she replied. She was, though. Not in her body, in her bones, in the places where old grief still lived, where no fire could reach. She turned back to the window. They'll come back, she said. Maybe not today, maybe not this cycle, but they will. Edgar set a connector aside and sat back on his heels. They might, he said, and we'll be ready. But will I? Her voice was low. What if I'm not? He met her eyes. Then I'll stand in front of you until you are. Sayelri laughed, software bitter. You really would, wouldn't you? He shrugged. I'm not brave, just stubborn. She looked down, then back at him. Her hand found the edge of her vest pocket. She hesitated. For days she'd carried it there, tucked beside the crystal containing her translation work, coiled tightly in a protective wrap of fabric, one of the last sacred objects that hadn't been taken from her. Not by fire, not by machines, not by silence. The heart weave. Her fingers closed around it now. She pulled it free and held it in both hands. I repaired this, she said. Edgar stood slowly, dusting his palms as he approached. The threads still held their memory. I wasn't sure I would ever give it away again. He didn't reach for it. He waited, and that made it harder. I told you what it means, she said. To carry someone else, to accept what can't be undone. His voice was quiet. I remember. She stared at the fabric. I don't know if I'm ready to be part of something again, she whispered. Even if I want it. A pause. Then, but I know I'm tired of being alone inside myself. Edgar nodded once. That's not nothing. No, she said, it's everything. Her hands trembled slightly as she held out the weave. But before he could take it, she drew it back. I need to say something first, she said. He waited. I've given things before, she said. To stay alive, to survive, my voice, my pride, my name. Each time something left me and didn't come back. He stepped forward slowly. And this time? She looked up at him. This time I choose. And she extended the weave again, not as surrender, as offering. Edgar took it gently. They stood facing each other, the fabric between them like breath suspended in space. Without words, they looped the threads, one around her wrist, one around his. The center line rested between their hands. She looked down, and then in her own language, in the old form, she whispered the first line of the rite. We do not bind, we carry. His voice followed, careful and low. And we do not forget. The moment held. Not sacred, not ceremonial, but real. She stepped closer, and for the first time since her capture, she didn't feel the need to flinch. His warmth wasn't a demand. It was a presence. Steady, quiet, unconditional. She could cry if she let herself. She didn't. But the tears were close. Later, the wind howled around the dome, kicking up fine dust that rattled against the outer hull. Inside, they worked in near silence, she refining her glyph database, Edgar repairing a cracked fusion coupler. At one point, she glanced over. He had tied a strip of fabric around his left forearm, the same pattern as the weave. It wasn't necessary, but it was intentional. She returned to her work, something easing in her spine. He didn't need to speak loyalty. He wore it. That evening, she placed the completed crystal in the relic archive. When the system confirmed the backup, she stood a moment longer, hand resting on the terminal. This knowledge wasn't a gift. It was a reclamation. And she'd made it with someone who had asked for nothing, and yet stood beside her at every turn. She turned. He was watching her, a mug in his hand, the lights catching silver at his temples. You're not who I thought humans were, she said. And you're not what I feared you'd be, he replied. Sayelri stepped toward him. Tomorrow, she said, we start restoring the songs. He smiled. Together. She paused. Then, will you wear the weave again tomorrow? I never took it off. And this time, when she leaned forward and rested her forehead lightly against his, she did it with open eyes. No fear. No hesitation. Only truth. They arrived at twilight. Not in a blaze of engines, not with banners or blasters. Just a low hum across the shield perimeter. Faint, deliberate, like a question waiting to be answered. Sayelri stood in the doorway of the dome, one hand pressed to the frame, the other curled tightly around the new data crystal she had built. It rested in her palm like a pulse, alive with every memory, every language root, every sacred pattern she and Edgar had uncovered together. Behind her, Edgar adjusted the heat shield dampeners along the rear conduit, his sleeves rolled, his jaw set in that familiar, quiet way. He hadn't asked if she wanted to run. He hadn't asked if she was afraid, because now they both knew she wasn't. The motion sensor blinked. 4 signals. Fast. Spaced. Registry enforcement. Sayori turned toward him. You don't have to speak for me this time. He straightened, gave her a look that was half warning, half pride. I wasn't going to. Her heart beat once hard. And then the outer alarm sounded, low and steady. They'll want you to surrender the crystal, Edgar said, crossing to the table where his personal records were stored. I won't. They'll want me to recant my report to the Artisan Council. You won't, she said. No, he agreed. I won't. A hiss broke the stillness, the entry seal releasing under external override. The inner hatch slid open with a sigh, and in stepped the first officer. She was tall, armor-pressed, and pale-eyed behind a visor that scanned Sayori in a millisecond. Salary of the Hazaith designation, she said flatly. You are under non-compliance protocol. Data possession in breach of Registry Regulation 77E. I possess no property, Sayori replied. Only memory and voice, neither of which you have the right to classify. The officer took a step closer. The information stored in this facility belongs to the Central Archives. Your designation was nullified at acquisition. Your name is mine, Sayori cut in. I chose it, and that makes it real. The officer turned to Edgar. You facilitated the illegal preservation of subclassified data. You defied recall order and engaged in restoration of forbidden linguistics. Edgar stepped forward, calm but firm. I submitted full reports to the council, protected under the Artifact Witness Restoration Act. That law was repealed. Only in core systems, Edgar said. Kirith 9 is still fringe, and fringe law still recognizes cultural autonomy. A pause. Tension filled the air, static, unspoken, heavy. Hand over the data crystal, the officer ordered. Now. Sayori held it tighter. Touch me, she said, and you erase the last living memory of an entire civilization's syntax. Not code, not signal. Soul. The officer didn't flinch, but Sayori took a step forward. You've spent centuries destroying our stories. You labeled us presentient to justify your cruelty. You burned temples and called it reclamation. But I am not a relic. I am not yours. I am the archive. Behind her, Edgar activated the dome's long-range transmitter. Incoming data stream locked to 3 cross-system historians, he said. Any hostile action here will be broadcast to half the fringe. You wouldn't dare. You already did, he said. We're just recording it. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the officer's comm device pinged, brief, shrill, final. She paused, tilted her head, listening, then slowly she stepped back. Orders revised, she said. Withdrawal authorized, for now. Her team retreated without a word. The hatch closed. The dome sealed again. Sayori didn't breathe until the silence settled. Not the silence of fear. The silence of freedom. Edgar walked to her side. You did it. No, she said. We did. She turned, holding the crystal between them. I want to publish this, she said. Not just store it. Not just survive. I want it to live. We'll distribute it together. I don't want to hide anymore. You don't have to. Her eyes searched his, and for the first time, she didn't feel like something reclaimed. She felt chosen. She placed the crystal in the relay console herself, initiating the upload with a single press. Then she walked back to the central table and removed the heart weave from her wrist. Edgar watched her, uncertain. I'm not taking it off because I regret it, she said, placing it on the table. I'm taking it off because I don't need a symbol anymore. He smiled, slow and warm. It's real now. Because we made it that way. She stepped forward, and this time, when she touched his face, it wasn't tentative. Her fingers rested lightly on his cheek, tracing the edges of his tiredness, his strength. I never thought I'd have this, she whispered. What? She leaned in. Their foreheads touched, a place I wasn't afraid to return to. He didn't speak. He just kissed her, gently, deliberately, and she let him. Not out of longing, not out of fear, but because she wanted to be here, in this exact moment, with this exact man. It was quiet when they parted. No music, no declarations. Just 2 people breathing the same air, after everything. Outside, the storm had passed. The horizon cracked open with the soft glow of a new sunrise over Kirith 9's far ridge. Pale gold filtered through the dust like hope rediscovered. Sayori stepped beside him, her voice quiet. There's a word in my language, she said. One we only used once every generation. What does it mean? She looked out across the still, sleeping world. It means the place where your memory begins again. He reached for her hand, held it, and this time, neither of them let go. The sun on Kirith 9 wasn't harsh that morning. It broke over the ridge like warm tea spilling from a cracked cup, imperfect, but golden. The wind was gentle for once, tugging lazily at the loose awnings Edgar had rigged over the dome's south courtyard. It smelled faintly of dry moss and iron dust. Salary stood barefoot on the stone platform outside the dome's hatch, her arms raised as she stretched toward the pale sky. Her hair, now no longer shorn or hidden, spilled down her back in thick, dark waves, catching the morning light in strands of oil-slick blue. She wore one of Edgar's old shirts, tied at the waist, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and trousers patched at the knees. She looked like she belonged here, because she did. Behind her, the soft clink of ceramic cups echoed from inside the dome. "Tea's ready," Edgar called. His voice was low, still rough with sleep. She smiled. "Did you use the spice leaf this time?" she asked, stepping inside. "Just enough to make it feel dangerous. You're a reckless man." He handed her the mug. "Only when it counts." She took it, their fingers brushing briefly. No hesitation now, no held breath, just warmth. They sat outside together, shoulder to shoulder, watching the horizon bloom. The dome's solar arrays hummed quietly in the background, feeding energy into the reclamation grid. Somewhere beyond the hills, a foraging drone buzzed like a beetle, too far to be seen, but close enough to be comforting. Edgar sipped his tea and let the silence stretch. Salary was the one who broke it. "I dreamed of the old city last night," she said. He turned his head. "Not the part that burned," she added. "The gardens, the ones near the archive halls. My mother used to take me there. There was a kind of vine that only bloomed once every 9 years. I never saw it open, but in the dream it had. Did you smell it?" She nodded. "Like copper and citrus, sweet and sharp." She set her cup down and leaned into him slightly, not out of need, just because she could. "I don't think the dream was about memory," she said. "I think it was about possibility." He looked at her profile, calm, centered, finally at ease. "What would you do?" he asked. "If you weren't afraid anymore?" She thought for a long moment. "Sing," she said, "in the old tongue, without shame, without silence." He smiled. "That's a dangerous kind of freedom. It's the only kind that matters." They sat for a while, not moving. Later they walked together to the satellite gardens, a narrow corridor of plants Edgar had once thought ornamental, but now understood as sacred. Salary had identified half of them by scent alone. She'd begun cataloging which ones matched fragments from her people's herbal texts. Some were used in healing, others were ceremonial. Today she touched a vine curling along the outer frame, then plucked a single leaf. "This one," she said, "was used in bonding rituals." Placed under the tongue, it helped the truth rise. Edgar arched a brow. "You want to test it?" "Not yet," she teased. "I like our truth slow." He chuckled and kissed her temple. The contact was soft, reverent, no longer a question. That afternoon they worked side by side in the relic chamber, uploading a full archive segment to the Artisan Council's Fringe network. Salary narrated the glyphs herself, her voice calm and sure, while Edgar calibrated the harmonics so each one pulsed with the right resonance. They broke only to eat, 2 bowls of stew, shared over quiet conversation about nothing urgent. And in the evening, as the desert light faded into a purple hush, Salary lit a small fire in the courtyard pit. She took out the woven heartweave, now resting in the center of their archive shelf. She didn't put it back on. Instead, she folded it carefully and placed it inside a glass vessel beside the tea, where it could be seen. Not as a bond unfinished, but as a chapter honored. As they sat in the fading light, Edgar reached for her hand. No storm, no sirens, no demands, just her, just him, alive, together.